Welcome to Diversified Lifelong Advisors, where our mission is to have you live in a life filled with wealth, health, and happiness. Today, we have a very special guest, Drew Tarvin, who is the world's first humor engineer. He's a best-selling author, keynote speaker, corporate trainer, and has a TED Talk that has been viewed by over 10 million people. Oh, and by the way, he is a newly minted father, which is probably, I'm guessing, his favorite title of all. So thanks for joining me, Drew. How you doing today?
I am doing well. The best part about being a newly minted father, I think, is I finally earned all the dad jokes that I've been saying for years because I love puns and wordplay. And so finally I'm like, yes, now I have the credentials to be able to say all of those dad jokes.
That's right. Well, soon you'll have the dad bod to go with it. Trust me. That's just not as fun. So tell me, we clearly very accomplished individual. You train, you inspire over 10,000 people at over 100 organizations with the power of humor in the workplace. Talk to me about what inspired you to do this and to become sort of the world's first humor engineer.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's not a job that you like go to a job fair for. It's not one like that I grew up was like, I'm going to totally be a humor engineer in the beginning days. No, I was my background is in computer science and engineering. And so I've always been an engineer, always been obsessed with solving problems and being efficient. And, I joke, I don't think of them as math problems. I always thought of them as math opportunities. Like I always loved that kind of aspect and loved math, always was good with computers. We got our first computer when I was in like junior high and fell in love with it and was one of those people that would take it apart and see how does it work and all that. And so that worked well until I got to Procter and Gamble. And that is where I learned that my obsession with efficiency and trying to do things with the least amount of work possible and kind of for the most gain didn't really work with humans. It didn't work with other people because of these, emotions and feelings that people had, and the fact that they would get stressed out or worn out, or that just because I said something as a project manager didn't mean that they would actually do it. And luckily for me, I had started doing improv and stand-up in university at Ohio State while getting my degree in computer science and engineering, and realized over time that, hey, this stuff that I'm doing in improv is actually helping me in the workplace. So this stuff that I'm starting to now do in stand-up comedy is helping to get people to pay attention to my meetings and making it more fun for myself. And so I thought, okay, if I'm solving problems with computers as a computer science engineer, as I'm using more and more humor, I'm solving problems with humor, that I think makes me a humor engineer.
Right, which I love, and I'm terrible at improv. But I envy it. It's got to be terrifying, I would imagine.
Well, what's interesting though is as you say that, except for like life is improv, right? Our conversation right now is improvised. You might do a little bit of planning. You might say, okay, I have a rough idea of some of the things that we want to talk about. Clearly your experience with the previous podcast episode, so you kind of have a structure, but still our conversation, you don't have a script of what you're going to say. And so, when people tell me like, oh, I could never do improv, it's like, well, you do it every single day. The context shifts a little bit and you can learn that other stuff. You can actually, in fact, if you're going to improvise every single day, even in a personal setting, why not learn some tips and techniques from actual improvisers so that you can do that better, even if you're never going to step on stage?
Right. Well, no, it makes sense. So help bridge this gap. So now you wrote a book, Humor That Works, and where you incorporate humor in the workplace as a business skill. So how does this translate to a more profitable, engaged leadership in the workplace? Like, how does this skill translate to a better output?
Right. Well, it's a fantastic question, and it actually connects to each one of the things that you mentioned in the title of the podcast. It helps you improve or build your wealth because you get more opportunities, and in fact, studies have shown that executives who use humor are paid more than executives who don't. So it does contribute to their wealth, certainly contributes to your wealth in terms of managing stress and being able to get and build your resilience so that you don't get completely like broken down and unable to do any type of work. It also burns calories. So it's actually, physiological benefits to your health and boost immune system and things like that. And ultimately it does lead to happiness. To answer the broader question of how does this work in the workplace, I'll frame it by asking you a very dumb question, Andrew, and I recognize it as a dumb question, but I still want you to answer the dumb question, okay?
I promise.
The dumb question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun?
I'm going to choose fun.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That just like 99.9% of the people that we work with, they say fun, right? It's like, as long as it doesn't cost too much money or not end up with me going to jail, I'm going to choose the fun option. And so it stands to reason then, if you were to say, make your client calls a little bit more fun, would they be more engaged in that process? Or if you were to make your emails a little bit more fun, would the other person be willing to read them or respond perhaps a little bit faster? If you were to make your own work just a little bit more fun, would you be more engaged? Would you be more excited about it? Would you be more motivated to do it? And the research shows us the answer is yes. There's over 30 benefits to using humor in the workplace, backed by research, case studies, and real world examples. And it all stems from that very simple question. And so when we're talking about humor in the workplace, some people are kind of like intimidated by it. Like, does that mean that I have to tell dad jokes? Or does that mean I have to become this epic storyteller? And it could. Everyone has their own different humor style. But what it really means is that broader thing. It's less about making work funny and more about making the process a little bit more fun.
So let's keep going with that, Drew. So, okay. So someone either deems themselves a fun individual or not, but recognizes the intrinsic value in their business, their output, their productivity by making their work environment fun, backed by research, 30 points that you mentioned, and just intuitively and anecdotally, yeah, as you said those things, of course, I would think a client I'm speaking to, if it's a fun conversation, is more engaged and leaves with all more excited about the work we're doing and at work and so on and so forth. But it's not necessarily an innate skill, especially for adults who have maybe suppressed this in themselves for decades. So how does one go about increasing the fun or teaching this skill with internally in their day-to-day employment?
Well, it's a great point that you've just made, that it is in fact a skill, which means if it is a skill, then it can be learned. And what we're kind of discovering now is that if it is a skill that can be learned, then the question isn't, are you funny? Because I think everyone is in different ways. The real question is, what kind of funny are you? Or what kind of funny do you want to be? And so we're kind of defining these separate 7 different humor personas that are kind of natural styles that people tend to gravitate towards. And rather than saying, oh, I got to try to be this type of funny, because most of the time when we think of humor, when we think of funny, we think of the stand-up comedian. And that is very intimidating for a lot of people. They're like, oh, I could never do stand-up. Like it terrifies me. I would get the shakes. I just couldn't do it. Well, it is a skill. You can learn that too. But we're not saying that you have to do that. For example, one of the personas is that of a curator. So maybe you really understand the benefits of humor, but you're terrible at telling jokes. You always forget the punchline, or you make it too wordy, or you're terrible as a storyteller, that because you always add, superfluous details that no one cares about, and you always have to say long story short, etc. Like, okay, well, you can improve those later, but take advantage of what you naturally do. Maybe you're this curator person who you find all this funny stuff online. You can leverage that by sharing it. Like, imagine you follow up with a client, and in the follow-up email, you'd be like, hey, I know we mentioned very briefly, my favorite comedian was Eddie Izzard because we talked about this thing. Here's a clip from Eddie Izzard that I think is amazing. Now, you don't have to be the one that made the funny thing, but you're the curator of that experience, the connoisseur of it. Right. And now people have that positive humor experience without you being the one that has to get the punchline. Now, that could be a follow-up link to a video. It could be images in your presentations, right? So something that's visually compelling. It could even be a quotation, right? That's what we use a lot of times, is sometimes like, oh, this quote, like I love this quote from Kurt Vonnegut that says, laughter and tears are both responses to frustration and exhaustion. I myself prefer to laugh because there's less cleaning up to do afterwards. And it's like, I think that's a great quote. It makes a good point. Oh, I'm curating that experience. I didn't come up with it, but now I'm sharing it or showcasing it with you.
Okay. And I'm assuming in your book, you learn how to figure out which of the 7 personas you are and how to strengthen that skill.
Well, so that is new stuff. That's like the brand new stuff that's coming out now. So if people go to humorthatworks.com/assessment, then they can take a free 2-minute assessment and kind of find out what your persona is and then what that means in the workplace. The book itself is kind of the precursor to that. It is for the people who are still like, okay, why humor? Okay, let's go into the deep research in it. Why the desperate need for it? The fact that 83% of Americans are stressed out at work, or 55% are unsatisfied with their jobs, which is crazy to me. It's crazy that more than half of people are unsatisfied with their jobs in the US, because statistically, it means that more people believe in ghosts in the United States than like what they do for a living. And there's like something wrong about that, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Although I do have a friend who had a haunted house, I swear.
Right. And so just to answer your question, the book kind of sets the stage for that. And then it goes over, as an engineer, I've kind of taken work apart, at least what I think of the way that work is. And work is really 5 core skills, right? No matter who you are, what you do, your work is some combination of first being able to execute a task, then being able to think strategically and solve problems, then be able to communicate effectively and also understand what other people are saying, then to connect at an emotional level or emotional intelligence, and then ultimately to be the ability to lead or to influence or motivate people. And so the book is kind of an exploration of high level, how does humor apply across each one of those 5 skills so that you can execute faster, think smarter, communicate better, connect closer, and lead further. That's kind of the context of the Humor That Works book.
Understood. So, okay, you're an engineer. We work with a lot of engineers. A lot of our clients are engineers. So it sounds wonderful, but give me a story where you saw your work, you went into a workplace, you introduced this concept, and it yielded return. I'm sure you have many of them, but give me your favorite that's worth sharing.
Well, certainly there's a couple of different directions we can go, because we've been very fortunate. When I first started, I mostly focused in IT and engineering. That was my first set of clients because that's my background. And kind of my promise, my brand kind of positioning at the time particularly was I can teach engineers how to be more human, right? Because that's what I had to learn. I can teach them these social skills, communication skills that we need, some of this improvisation that we need and all that. So certainly there's plenty of examples within that, but you asked for my favorite example. And the first one that comes to mind was actually some work that we did with the FBI. And so the result is not like, oh, they increased revenue for the FBI, but rather they achieved the goal that they wanted. The goal of the FBI, which I'll tell you, it was the most intimidating group that I've ever worked with, especially giving presentations to, as you can imagine. When I was speaking for the first time, it was the first time that I'd ever been presenting to a room where 90% of the audience was armed, where it's like, okay, if these jokes don't go well, like this could go poorly. But that was exactly the reason why the FBI wanted to learn about humor, was because there's this intimidation factor that comes with them. And they have an office of private sector where they are working with the CEOs or C-suite executive of these different companies to try to build relationships so that they can combat cyber warfare and so that they can, prevent embezzlement from happening and all that kind of stuff, a preventative kind of program within the corporate space. And so their success was learning how to use humor to build rapport. How can they go into a meeting to then make it so that it's not so intimidating that it's the FBI, that they can have like say, hey, I am also a human as well. Let's connect first at a human level, and then let's, attach or go against or talk about the things that we need to in the meeting. And so some of the key takeaways for them from that was being authentic, being a storyteller. One of the great things that you can do if you want to build rapport with someone is come up with your origin story. Talk about the story of why you do what you do, add some humor to that. And immediately in that first interaction, people are like, oh, that's why Andrew is interested. That's why he does this financial stuff. And it's not just, oh, he wants to make money, but oh, I'm going to remember this saying. And now that's what people remember later. It wasn't just this call about finances, but oh, it's a great way to connect with this interesting person who has this passionate background.
I love it. Now, of course, all I'm picturing as you tell the story is an FBI agent in an interrogating room, right, with some terrorist, right, having them in stitches, and then like, okay, now that we're joking around,
now that we're friendly,
why'd you bomb the building, right?
Right. Well, the reality is I guess it's kind of the old cliche of like you catch more flies with honey than you do. I don't actually know what the second half of that, cliche is. And so yeah. I don't know. I was fortunate. I was working with the Office of Private Sector. So I don't know. I don't think that they're interrogating CEOs, but it might be part of the process. But that's exactly why they needed it. The techniques of like, hey, I'm going to kick down your door and come into this meeting that we're supposed to have, not going to work. So right. Maybe a little bit of levity will instead.
Yeah. So it humanizes people.
It humanizes, and then at the same time, like the other, another example in terms of like people, things that I've been very proud of is we've been doing, especially during the pandemic, quite a bit of work with healthcare organizations and emergency first responders, because that is incredibly high stress environments. And so we're not teaching a nurse necessarily how to tell jokes to their patients, although that's part of it, is bedside manner, et cetera. But sometimes it's just teaching the individual themselves how to manage their stress better, because humor and laughter can be the antidote to stress. If you think about all the negative things that stress causes from a physiological level in terms of increased blood pressure and increased muscle tension and decreased immune system, all that, laughter counteracts all of those negative effects. When we laugh, we increase the blood flow through our body, we decrease our blood pressure, we decrease our muscle tension, we actually burn calories, etc. So like we can use it. And that's the focus for me. And maybe my takeaway, it's still very much the engineer. When we work with organizations, it's okay, understanding what is your current challenge. And then we're going to say, here's how humor can help you to solve that. And about 75% of the time, humor can help. It might be a different issue first, but most of the time we can say, okay, here's how humor can at least improve that situation, in addition to some of these other things that you can do to solve the problem.
Right. So there's the old Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. What's the first step for someone to say, aha, I got it, I'd like to incorporate this?
The first step is that aha moment. So that's a great starting point. If you're listening, like, okay, maybe this is worth something. That's already the first step. You're starting there, because it is kind of that choice, right? Because humor is one of those things that you don't necessarily learn about it in school, and your manager isn't typically like, hey, great work out there, but you need to incorporate more humor into your work. Like, it's for whatever, it's not a thing that we coach yet. That's part of my goal, is to get people to understand the value of it. So I think an easy step is to just think about, what is the natural humor that you use? What's the type of humor that you use with your friends that make you laugh or smile? And then how can you make that version appropriate in the workplace, right? There is this very big kind of caveat to everything that I'm saying, is that it does have to be effective, appropriate humor at work. But start with what you find interesting. You can start with the humor assessment. As I mentioned, it takes 2 minutes. So you can kind of then say, oh, well, let me at least learn my natural style. And maybe you'll say, okay, yeah, I'm more of I'm an engineer where I like to solve problems with it. Or you could even be an enthusiast. An enthusiast is a great form. And they're just people who laugh a lot, people who find joy in the smallest things in life. You can incorporate that in your work. Because if you're with a client, or if you're with a manager, and they say something even just kind of moderately funny, but you smile or you laugh a little bit, they're going to feel positive about the interaction, even if it's not the most funny thing in the world, right? So I would say start with kind of what is a strength of yours, make sure it's filtered through this appropriate lens, and build from there. And then over time, you'll start to adapt and tweak and change things and be like, okay, this is working, this is not working. And of course, if people want to learn more specific techniques, can certainly, find resources for that. But that, I think, is the starting point.
Okay, great. So in that same vein, at our company, Diversified, we're passionate about promoting wealth, health, and happiness. What advice would you give someone that's trying to find their own happiness?
I think that the advice that I would give is, well, use humor. That's what we've been talking about. But I think broader than that, and where humor in some ways started for me, was that I believe that you are responsible for your own happiness. I don't think that you necessarily control it, but I think you are responsible for it. It is not up to your boss or your coworkers or your clients or society or life to make sure that you are happy. Now, hopefully those people don't negate that, and hopefully they don't detract from it, but it's not their responsibility to do it. It's ultimately yours. And so taking that ownership, trying to find the small ways to bring a little bit more joy, trying to find the small ways to add a little bit more fun, that is part of what we mean by incorporating humor, so that you can achieve those things. Because my thought is, the average person is going to work 90,000 hours in their lifetime, right? 90,000 hours. That's longer than everything on Netflix. That is a long time. You might as well enjoy it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And what makes you happy, Drew?
Well, certainly my daughter now, my brand new daughter, makes me happy. My wife makes it happy, and milkshakes make me happy. I'm a huge fan of milkshakes. And so that's one of the small things that I do, is when whether I have a stressful day or I deliver a big event, I go and get myself a milkshake and do that little bit of reward. But also doing things like this, connecting with passionate people who are helping to improve the world and bringing a little bit of humor to people's lives. That's to make someone laugh or smile is a great, great joy to me.
I get it. And milkshakes.
And
So,
milkshakes.
all right, time to leave us with your last tip that you want everyone to remember. What do
Certainly.
you
Well,
got?
as I mentioned that, it all starts with a choice. So certainly if people want to learn a little bit more, humorthatworks.com, we've got a bunch of free resources and things there for people to find out, including the assessment if you want to get started with that. But more so it is a mental choice. So the thing that I encourage you to try to do is simply try to drive 1 smile per hour. Try to think about each hour of your day, one thing that you can do that either brings a smile to your face or the face of someone else. And it can be simple. It can be as simple as sharing a story at the beginning of a presentation or using an image in your set of slides. It can be as simple as listening to a comedy podcast on your way home from work so that you laugh a little bit and show up more present for your family when you get there. It can be a whole wide range of things. But if you look for 1 smile per hour, you'll start to notice just how simple it can be to add a little bit more humor into your day. You'll start to develop a humor habit, and you'll start to be using humor for better wealth, health, and happiness, I think.
I love it. A smile an hour. That's fantastic. Drew, this was enlightening, fun, and I'm excited to go take my assessment to know that I'm funny in all 7 categories, obviously, or none, but we'll find out. So thanks for joining us, Drew Tarvin. Do me one more favor. Tell everyone where they can, you mentioned your website, but where else can they follow you, learn, get your book? Give us all the spots to connect to Drew for us.
Certainly. Humorthatworks.com is a great starting point for resources. If you want to connect with me directly, I'm at Drew Tarvin. So DREWTARV as in Victor IN on all social media. So certainly feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and I still have a MySpace page. Andrew, I don't know if you know this, but MySpace still exists, and I still have a page for some reason. So if you're like really jamming it out on MySpace, certainly feel free to connect with me there too.
I'd love to see the people that are contacting you on your MySpace page.
Yeah.
That would bring me humor. Drew, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day. Very accomplished, very impressive, everything you've done. I think your message is fantastic for all of us to incorporate. So thanks again. As always, I'm Andrew Rosen on our Wealth, Health, and Happiness interview series. And as always, stay wealthy, stay healthy, stay happy. Take care.